Okay, as with all of your writing, it starts with the claim, but the argument claim will obey a number of rules and certain restrictions when you write it. And if you follow these rules and restrictions, it will greatly improve your ability to write the paper. So Allison walks into class today and asking me a question about what exactly she should be writing for her argument section, and writing the argument claim itself will answer her question for her, where exactly she's going. How broad, how specific, what exactly she's focusing on. You must write that first sentence clearly, or else everything else just sort of falls apart. So let's talk about the qualities of argument claims. Yeah, Todd, would you mind shutting the door for us, please? Thanks. Okay, we're talking about generally, and most of you want to focus on, an argumentative claim of action. That means you're talking about something that should or should not happen. Preferably something should happen. We'll address that in a moment. But you're not talking about argumentative claims of evaluation. If I'm evaluating something, what am I saying about it? Sorry? Judging it, yeah. Reviewing it, good, bad, excellent, the best, the worst. That's not what you're focusing on right now. You folks are discussing about some way that the world should be. You are spurring somebody to do something. You're making argumentative claims of action. But argumentative claims could also be those of evaluation. So you could be talking about good, bad, best, worst, better, worse than something else. But we're not talking about that today. So I just want to tell you what we're not doing. We are focusing on these argumentative claims of action. First quality of it. It's always based on an opinion. A fact is verifiable as true or false through research and experiment. So I'll give you an example of what we're not looking for. High school students use cell phones between classes. Why is that not an opinion? Hold on, Todd. And what does that mean? It's that it's a fact. You say something's a fact. But how do you distinguish between a fact and an opinion? I know you know it when you see it. I don't doubt that.
Like the word should.
Actually, that's excellent, Todd, and getting to something that we were about to talk about. So you have grammatical markers. The word should is a grammatical marker of an opinion. Ought is synonymous. So ought or should indicates opinion. That's correct. Something else, Mitchell. Fact can be proven true or false through research and experiment. How would I prove this to be true or false? Observation. All I need is 2 students to use cell phones between classes, and I verified this as true. So that's a fact. I can go out there and observe it to be true or false. Can't say the same with this statement. High school students should be allowed to use cell phones between classes. And that's where we're differentiating between mere science or explanation and actual argument. Now we're in the realm of argument. And thank you, Todd. You are correct that the grammatical marker of an opinion in claims of action is that word should. And you may use the word ought if you wish. They're synonymous, but ought is a little bit archaic. High school students should be allowed to use cell phones between classes. In this first statement, high school students use cell phones between classes. We just stated that we could verify that by walking out in the halls and watching and looking. How do we verify the truth of this opinion? Nikki, how do we determine the truth of that opinion? High school students should be allowed to use cell phones between classes. I want to ask, is this true or is this false? With this statement, it was easy. How do we do it with that statement? You're really close. Nikki, we back it up with logic. More than evidence. Evidence woven together with rules of logic that verify that that is actually true. And there are logical models that we'll talk about that verify that. It's a much more complex process to prove this true than this. But that's fine, because this statement right here is simple, superficial, and ultimately unrewarding. This is a rewarding statement. And by rewarding, I mean it means something to us in our life. Does this change the way I exist on a daily basis? Yes. Does this? Not really. That's a fact that is woven into other patterns that ultimately end up here. Second quality of the claim of action, it presents a controversy. You will not write argumentative claims that state opinions with which everybody agrees. Federal government should illegalize murder. Anybody disagree with that? Good. I'm glad. It makes me feel more comfortable being in this room right now. No sane person disagrees with that statement. No sane person wants to argue the other side. Could I argue the other side? I guess I could construct some sort of ridiculous argument, probably fall in on itself and just ultimately be circular or self-defeating or riddled with all sorts of fallacies, but I guess I could try. But it's not going to work. There are certain points on which the vast majority of your audience agrees. And you should not write a claim that does that, because then nobody's interested in reading your paper. That's controversial. The federal government should endorse a religion. That means state that there is a religion that seems to work, that the federal government will celebrate, and so on. People do seem to want to argue both sides of that. I've heard arguments on both sides of that. I've heard people state that the founding fathers to the United States were of a certain religion, therefore everything else is intended to follow that religion, even if it's not in a very strict sense. I've heard some people saying that no, quite the opposite, we must eliminate all references to religion whatsoever when we're talking about government. So people want to argue this. People will construct camps on both sides, and that's what a controversy is. Third quality is pretty easy, even though some students sometimes overlook it. You must think of the power of your rhetoric, the power of your voice, how it seems to work. Start thinking like a politician for a moment. Not too much like a politician, but just a little bit. Start thinking like a speaker. You will generally motivate people more, and you will create a more powerful voice when you are thinking in affirmation, when you are telling people things that should be done, not things that should not be done. So, this does not work for a number of reasons. Americans should not drive as much as they do. The number one reason that doesn't work is that people generally react to negativity negatively. I know that might be kind of surprising, but the best speeches are those which are affirmative in nature. Another problem with the negation statements is quite often they're not very clear. This statement is not very clear at all. I'm not quite sure what anybody's saying. Patrick, what's the grammatical marker there that shows the negation? Correct. Anybody know another grammatical marker that would be similar that would also show negation?
Never.
Never. Should shows should by itself does not show one or the other. Never is another marker of negation. So scrub those words out of your argument claims. I don't want to see those in your argument claims. I want to see something like this. Americans should reduce their use of automobiles. Again, somebody might make a mistake and say, but isn't the word reduce negative? Only in connotation. Technically, it's not a statement of negation. Statements of negation only occur when you negate the verb, and you negate the verb with not and never. So think of verbs as math. Think of verbs as positive, negative, plus or minus. That's what logic does. By the way, logic is a bit like math. When we start to look at these in terms of logic, we'll look at it almost in mathematical terms. And this has a negative charge. So it's a negative value. This, since there is no negation there, retains its positive or affirmative value.
How would you say about like the Penn State incident? Because like I'm arguing that like he should have not been fired. So how would you say that without using?
Alan's got an excellent question. So let me rephrase and, well, not rephrase, but state since I'm trying to record this, Alan's question. Alan's basically been thinking about how Paterno should not have been fired. And he wants to think, how do I phrase that in an affirmative sense? You could take the not fired and think of not fired and just translate it into a positive verb like retained or kept. They should have kept Joe Paterno. They should have retained Joe Paterno. I know it seems like a very slight change, but it actually makes a significant difference in terms of the logic and the rhetoric of it. So that's your first, is to think we should have kept Joe Paterno. We should have retained Joe Paterno. Another way to do this is to refocus your claim. Penn State should have only held Jerry Sandusky accountable. That would be saying almost the same thing and would have the same sort of outcome, but it's also affirmative. Ashley, do you have a question, or are you running?
I have another one. You could say Penn State officials should have allowed Joe Paterno to keep his job.
That's right. Should have allowed Joe Paterno to keep being the coach for the football team. There you go. Any of those will work. Should be Alan and everybody else. If you have a negative idea, grammatically negative, it shouldn't be much work to translate it pretty quickly. But we'll do some workshopping on that. Clarity. Specificity. Specific, you know that word? Specificity is the noun form. Just like clarity is the noun form of clear. Global warming should be stopped. This is unclear. Anybody tell me why? How and what else, Jada? Not only is the how missing, what else is missing? Possibly when, although with the absence of a time marker, we just assume now. What was the other, Allison? Who? You want to distinguish the immature thinker from the mature thinker? Here you go. The immature thinker says, global warming, bad, should be stopped. Okay, who's going to do that and how are they going to do that? I don't know. I just know it's bad and should be stopped. That attitude, that unspecific attitude that does not ever state a responsible party or a method by which they will put that into action, never accomplishes anything. You only accomplish something if you look specifically at a responsible party. This person, this agency should do this thing. And then we start seeing some action. World governments should act to reduce global warming. That's better. However, let's make it even more specific. We now have what I'm calling the responsible party. Oh, and let me talk about the responsible party for a moment. We're talking about action, the claim of action and clarity. The responsible party is not necessarily the focus of your subject. So, for instance, if Alan's focusing a lot of his attention on Joe Paterno, the responsible party is not Joe Paterno. Who's the responsible party? The school, Penn State, right? The organization is responsible. They are the responsible party, the person or the organization that can do something. So you got to focus on who they are. And it's not always the person you set out to explore. So think about who can do something. Can somebody make that more specific? How do world governments reduce global warming? I could think of a number. Okay, what type of legislation? What are we going to do? Anybody know how governments are attempting or not attempting to? Okay, so should act to reduce vehicle emissions. Can somebody give me one more? How else are world governments stopping or trying to combat global warming? Thank you. And by adopt, we usually mean giving money and subsidies for those who want to do that. Should promote alternative energy. So I'll take mine, make it even more specific. Write these clearly, please. Oh, and make sure that it's arguable. Arguable means that somebody could take an opposing position and that you can do research on this. Some of you find yourselves in difficult situations because you are working with subjects that you can't really research. It seems to be a statement of opinion. Seems to be pretty specific with a responsible party, somebody doing something. I don't see the word should in there. But the more important problem is that you can't research this. That you can research. Television producers should program more reality television. Somebody tell me what you might research. How is that expressed usually, Trey? What do we call those stats though? In television. Thank you. TV ratings. Okay, so you'll focus on TV ratings. Anybody know any other stats that you could research for this? You're a television producer. Why are you programming reality television? People watch it, and if people watch it, what does that lead to for your television station? How? Advertising. So you're going to look at TV ratings, and you're going to look at ad rates. Well, yeah, that's true. Oh, good. Production costs. So it could cost $3 to $4 million to produce an episode of a fictional television series, where it might cost ridiculously less to produce reality television. I don't know, by the way, whether or not that's true. But I do know that a show like Survivor at its height would probably command some pretty decent ad rates. That means you can sell advertising time to companies at higher rates, because they get better ratings, because more people are watching. Can somebody argue against this? Television producers should program more reality television. Take a different approach. Why? Because it's the death of culture? Okay, so you are thinking that you could actually look at the aesthetic side of things. Say reality television is not very well received by whom? Okay, viewer. We could look at viewer opinion, but I have a feeling, Michael, that if everything we've been saying is true, that the viewers probably like this stuff. Who won't? Okay, parent. Okay, we could think about parents. Kids will like reality programming as long as it's programmed at their level. So they probably won't care about, which one wouldn't they care about? They won't care about Top Chef or something like that, usually. Children. But what reality shows program for children? Aren't there some like on Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon and such? I don't know. We're not children, right? I have no clue. I was thinking of critics. Critical reception. There are television critics out there, by the way. Yes, some people are paid salaries, much higher than mine, to watch TV and talk about it. I don't know. See? So, what do I mean by arguable? I mean, you could say, I am arguing for this, and I have research. I am arguing against this, And I have research. If you can find research on both sides to argue a pro position and a con position, then this entire thing is arguable, and that seems to work. Blah, blah, blah. Enough of that. Right one. I want you to take a look at your own ideas. Some of you will be able to rattle off an argument claim really quickly. Some of you will take a little bit more time with it and need some help. I'd like to spend the remainder of our time workshopping them. So take a moment, look at your paper, write your argumentative claim. Think about a responsible party, a should statement, specifically what you think people should do or an organization should do. So what I'd like to do right now is take a look at one that I think is fairly clear and adhering to the model that I'd like. United States military should have stricter psychological evaluations before clearing soldiers for duty. Good. I know that some of you have struggled with the overall idea for this paper, and maybe that's been my fault for not explaining it very well, but this provides me an opportunity to talk about what I was thinking. When I listen to the news and I hear a report on a current event, it almost always is accompanied by somebody making an argument. And that argument is usually generalized past that one example. So when I'm hearing about this nutcase shooting people in Afghanistan, I then immediately hear commentary where people are talking about PTSD and screening for psychological difficulties in the U.S. military, and how maybe they're not doing their job with that and they need to do that a little bit better. The two accompany each other. It seems like we cannot just report on events without commenting on them in some way. We need to generalize and make an argument. We have to insert our opinion into it. You can't talk about Joe Paterno without inserting your opinion into it. You can't talk about Lady Gaga and her efforts at anti-bullying without inserting your opinion into it. That's natural, and that's what this paper is all about. So what Michael's done here is go from his current event, which is, did you find the soldier's name?
His name is Robert Bales.
Robert Bales. Okay, looking at the example of Robert Bales and how he was possibly suffering from mental illness, which led him to kill a number of Afghan citizens. He's looking at that specifically, but then he's drawing out a general argument claim from it. The United States military should have stricter psychological evaluations before clearing soldiers for duty. Should. It's opinion-based. Satisfies criterion number 1. What was criterion number 2? Controversy. Yes. So controversy, should we have stricter psychological evaluations? I could see somebody arguing against that by saying, you know what, we already have psychological evaluations in place in the U.S. military. They are fine. This was a mistake and nothing more. It does not require a re-examination of the entire process. That's true. That's true. Or you could argue that he's not actually mentally ill. I mean, some people do commit atrocities without being mentally ill. We can't simply say that everybody commits a crime is mentally ill, because that's sort of circular logic. I'm sorry? Hate? That Breivik guy over in Norway was just found to be sane, right, Dory?
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy that killed 77 people was just found to be sane.
He said he wanted to do it again. He said he wanted to
Hold on. You're into philosophical territory, folks. Is it possible, and I'm just going to throw this question out there because it's a fascinating question, is it possible for a man that premeditatedly, not in the act of war or anything else, kills 77 innocent people to be sane? Norwegian courts have said, yes, this guy's sane. And they're going to try him as a sane man.
because he planned it out.
Haven't you ever heard of evil geniuses? Go ahead, Dory. Insert.
He said if he was out, he said he would do it again, but even more.
Yeah.
Right.
Hold on. You guys are. Shh. Stop. I love it, but we're drawing off track. You're getting exactly to the point that I'm trying to encourage with this paper. I'm trying for you to look around at your world, say, this thing happened, that's crazy for this reason. And I'm going to argue something about it. Good. So let's get back onto Michael's. We've hit criterion 1 and 2. It is controversial. Number 3 is that it's affirmative, right? It is affirmative. I do not see a not or never. Number 4, it must be clear. And that means responsible parties, clear course of action. And the United States military is a very clear responsible party here, so that works out well. Stricter, that's the only part of this statement that begs some clarification. But I don't necessarily think that Michael needs to clarify that in the sentence. He simply needs to make sure to clarify it in his discussion. Because here would be vague. Let me show you vague. U.S. military should have different psychological evaluations. That's vague. For what reason? It could be lighter, or it could be stricter, which up or down. Yes. The fact that he says stricter shows that he's on one side of this spectrum, and therefore I understand where he's going with it. It's clear enough he can add detail later on. And that's why Shada, I said, might not be a little bit vague with the lesson idea, lessening religious content in political campaigns. Is it arguable? Absolutely. Both sides of this can find ground on which to argue their cases. So this works well. I don't like the verb have, but I never do. So the United States military should institute, because that's what an organization does with policy. It institutes policies or enacts policies, one or the other. That works. Go ahead.
So don't you think that's like, I said FCC should prevent adult-oriented television from being broadcast during prime time, but don't you think that's like true?
Yes. So Allison's saying the FCC should prevent adult-oriented content from being broadcast during prime time. She's arguing something that is already policy that's on the books. Can you argue for a policy that is already in place? Absolutely. Guess what? What's the abortion debate? One side's arguing for policy that's already in place, and the other side's arguing for change. It's still an argument. They still both have argument. Yeah, yeah. Arguments are vital for standing policies. Not all arguments are change-oriented. Okay, who's next? Ashley? Okay, since you're having some struggle with it. Malia, did I see your hand? No? Sure. All right. I know, it's white on white. That's why. Do a Control A, Ashley, and then I can change that to color you can see. Interesting and challenging. Okay, so let's run through this pretty quickly on where we know it's hitting the mark. We know it's controversial. We know that some people will say, no, I am not as guilty. Somebody shoots somebody else and I didn't stand in the way, so now I'm guilty? No. That's not going to work out. So some people will argue that. But then, obviously, Ashley's going for ideas like the Paterno scandal, where she's saying somebody knew a crime was being committed and did not do anything to stop that crime, therefore that person is as guilty and should be fired. So she's on the Paterno should have been fired sort of spectrum, side of the spectrum. And also she's referring to, in the background section, the Holocaust issue, talking about people that did nothing to stand up against Nazi aggression. Controversial. Good. Researchable? Arguable? Could you argue on both sides of this? I would say so. And could you research both sides of this? Actually, you're going to find that your research might actually draw you into philosophy. And by that, I mean you're not necessarily going to research statistics, but you might actually research what philosophers, both classic and modern, have to say about this, because you're talking morality. You're talking about ethics. You're saying that...
Because a lot of people are saying that Joe Paterno himself had a moral responsibility to report his actions.
And it's not, you're not talking about a legal responsibility, you're talking about a moral responsibility. Legal responsibilities are researched through researching law and policy. Moral responsibilities are researched through philosophy. So it could be pretty interesting for you, and I'm certainly in a position to help guide you through that, seeing as I do have one of the most worthless degrees in the world, which is philosophy. In all cases, especially those involving the welfare of innocents, bystanders. Our bystanders is our responsible party. I want to hold that off for a moment. Let's look at the first criterion, opinion. Is it opinion-based? We don't see that word should. So in where do we see the opinion? Share? I shared my French fries with somebody. It doesn't seem opinion very much to me.
I think the fact that it can't be proven easily, it's not something that...
It can be proven. That's the core of argument, is that it can be proven. It can be proven, but it's proven through different means. Argument claims are proven through logic, not through mere observation and experimentation. Science deals in fact, proven through observation and experimentation and research. Philosophy deals in argumentation, which is proven through logic. So I think you need to rephrase this a little bit. In all cases, especially those involving the welfare of innocence, people should hold bystanders as morally accountable or culpable, if you want that word, as the criminals they watch. I think that works.
Does all that sentence make it opinion?
All? In all cases? No, that just specifies the domain. Am I talking about all or some? That doesn't change whether, because I could say that all students use cell phones between classes or some students use cell phones. The all or some does not change the nature of the statement. People should is in there. Morally accountable. Now we're talking about opinion-based. That works. I left people as a responsible party pretty general because, Ashley, I think that you're going to talk about the Holocaust, and you're going to talk about the NCAA. You're going to talk about a lot. And I intentionally left the responsible party a little bit vague, such that you could do that. Okay? Quick questions before I give the assignment. Then here it is. So for the development of your argument, I want you to start a file on Google Docs. I want you to call it research paper, and your first assignment on that file is to give me your claim. Just type it and share it, and I want that by tomorrow. We'll start by looking at some of them. So Google Docs, research paper, one sentence, folks. One sentence, your argument claim.
When I was writing mine, I wasn't sure if it's going to be easily arguable.
Yeah, it's definitely easily arguable, and not only that, but Michael, connected to recent coverage,